The phone call that changed everything came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but insomnia has its advantages sometimes. Diana thought I was asleep in my study, probably dreaming about golf courses and early bird specials like every other 65-year-old about to collect his gold watch. He'll never see it coming, babe. Tomorrow's the day. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Her voice drifted through the thin walls of our suburban colonial, the same house where we'd raised two ungrateful kids and pretended to be happy for 28 years. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart hammering like a teenager caught sneaking out. "The papers are ready," she continued, and I could hear that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she wanted something. Right during his speech, can you imagine his face? Laughter. Male laughter. Young male laughter. My name is Arthur Denton, and until that moment, I thought the only thing that would eliminate me at my retirement party was the cheap coffee they serve in the corporate event hall. Turns out, it was my wife's libido and her taste for men young enough to be our son. I shuffled back to my leather chair, the one Diana always complained about because it didn't match her precious decor scheme. 37 years I'd spent climbing the corporate ladder at Morrison & Associates, working my way up from junior accountant to chief financial officer. 37 years of budgets and spreadsheets and board meetings that could cure insomnia. And this was how it ended. The house felt different now, like someone had rearranged all the furniture while I wasn't looking. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me. Diana and me at Niagara Falls, the kids' graduation pictures, Christmas mornings that now felt like elaborate lies. Had she been planning this for months? Years? I walked to the window and stared out at our manicured lawn, the automatic sprinkler system I'd installed last spring creating perfect arcs of water in the moonlight. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. The Hendersons' house across the street was dark, their new BMW parked in the driveway like a monument to suburban success. Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes stood guard over her prize-winning roses. But normal was gone. It had been erased by a quiet phone call and replaced with something I couldn't undo. I spent the rest of the night in that chair, watching the sun come up over our neighborhood, thinking about the speech I'd prepared for today's party. 3 pages of heartfelt gratitude, memories of colleagues who'd become friends, hopes for the future Diana and I would share together. I'd even included a joke about finally having time to fix all the things around the house that had been on her honey-do list for years. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. At 7 a.m. sharp, Diana emerged from our bedroom looking like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her smile bright enough to power a small city. She wore the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, the one that made her eyes look like sapphires. "Morning, honey," she chirped, kissing my cheek with lips that had probably been whispering sweet nothings to her boyfriend just hours before. "Big day today. Are you excited?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how I'd missed all the signs. The late nights at the office, the new clothes, the way she'd started going to the gym religiously and buying expensive perfume, the separate bedrooms we justified as helping with my snoring problem. "Thrilled," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "Just thrilled." She bustled around the kitchen, making coffee and toast like this was any other morning, humming some pop song I didn't recognize, probably something her young lover had introduced her to. I found myself studying her movements, cataloging every gesture like evidence in a case I was building. "The kids will be there today," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Olivia's driving down from Boston, and Ben's taking the afternoon off work. They're so proud of you, Arthur. We all are." The kids. Our precious children who called maybe twice a month and visited on major holidays if we were lucky. Olivia, 32 and still single, worked as a marketing director for some tech startup that burned through investor money like kindling. Ben, 29, sold insurance and lived in a condo his mother had co-signed for because his credit was shot from college loans and poor decisions. "That's nice," I said, sipping my coffee and watching her perform this elaborate charade. "I'm sure they'll enjoy the party." Diana glanced at me then, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Nervousness? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Well, I should get ready," she said, already heading toward the stairs. "The party starts at noon, and I want to make sure everything's perfect for your special day." Perfect. Right. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for another hour, staring at the retirement speech I'd printed out the night before. 3 pages of lies and sentiment that would never see the light of day. Instead, I folded the papers carefully and slipped them into my jacket pocket. I had a feeling I might need them later, though not for the reason I'd originally intended. The morning crawled by like a funeral procession. I showered, shaved, and put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one Diana had picked out for me last Christmas. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger staring back. Same graying hair, same brown eyes, same lines around the mouth from decades of forced corporate smiles. But something fundamental had changed overnight. The man in the mirror looked dangerous. The Morrison & Associates corporate event hall buzzed with the kind of forced enthusiasm that makes root canals seem appealing. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that special shade of institutional beige that sucked the soul out of any gathering. Folding tables draped in white plastic tablecloths held the standard retirement party fare. A sheet cake with "Congratulations, Arthur," written in blue frosting, coffee that could strip paint, and finger sandwiches that had probably been sitting out since the Clinton administration. I stood near the entrance, shaking hands and accepting congratulations from colleagues who'd barely spoken to me in the past 5 years. The accounting department was well represented. Janet from receivables, Mike from payroll, the entire audit team looking uncomfortable in their Sunday best. My old boss, Harold Morrison himself, had even made an appearance, though he spent most of his time checking his phone and glancing at his watch. "Arthur, there's the man of the hour." I turned to see Kyle Brennan pushing through the crowd, a genuine smile on his weathered face. Kyle and I had been friends since college, back when we thought we'd change the world with our business degrees and unlimited ambition. He'd taken a different path, 25 years as a detective with the city police before retiring early to open a bar downtown. Kyle was one of the few people in my life who didn't want anything from me except friendship. "Kyle, you old bastard," I said, gripping his hand. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied, but his eyes were sharp, studying my face. Kyle had always been able to read people better than anyone I knew. It's what made him a good cop and an even better friend. "You doing okay? You look a little tired," I finished. "Big day, you know how it is?" He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Kyle had met Diana plenty of times over the years, usually at barbecues and holiday parties where she'd played the perfect corporate wife. He'd never said anything directly, but I'd caught him watching her sometimes with the same expression he probably used to study suspects in interrogation rooms. "Listen," he said quietly, "if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you know where to find me. The Brass Monkey's always open for friends." The Brass Monkey was Kyle's bar, a dive in the warehouse district that catered to cops, construction workers, and anyone else who preferred their drinks strong and their conversations honest. I'd been there exactly twice in the 3 years since he'd opened it, both times when Diana was out of town on business trips that I now realized probably weren't business at all. "Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it." Before he could respond, the crowd shifted, and I saw Diana entering the hall like a queen making her grand entrance. She'd changed into a different outfit, a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves and made every man in the room take notice. Behind her, trying to look casual, was Victor Hale. Victor, 28 years old, MBA from Wharton, and the kind of ambitious little shark who'd stepped on anyone's throat to climb the corporate ladder. He'd joined Morrison & Associates 2 years ago as a junior consultant, all perfect teeth and designer suits, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. Diana had mentioned him a few times, always in the context of work, always with just a little too much enthusiasm. Now I knew why. He was handsome in that generic way that appealed to women going through midlife crises, tall, dark hair, perfectly styled, the kind of jawline you see in cologne advertisements. He wore his success like expensive cologne, heavy and obvious. The kind of man who drove a BMW and quoted Sun Tzu in business meetings and thought he was the first person to discover that older women were grateful for attention from younger men. Diana spotted me across the room and waved, her smile so bright it could have guided ships to shore. Victor nodded in my direction with what I'm sure he thought was respectful acknowledgement, but I caught the smirk lurking behind his professional mask. "Dad." I turned to see my children approaching, Olivia in her power suit and perpetual frown, Ben looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. They hugged me dutifully, the kind of embraces you give distant relatives at funerals. "Congratulations, Dad," Olivia said, her voice carrying that slight edge it had developed sometime during her teenage years and never lost. 37 years, that's really something." "Yeah, Dad. Amazing," Ben added, already scanning the room for the bar. "So what are your plans now? Golf, fishing, finally going to take that cruise Mom's been talking about?" "The cruise?" "Right. Diana had been pushing for a Mediterranean cruise for months, something about wanting to see Italy and Greece before we got too old to travel. I'd assumed it was her way of trying to rekindle our marriage, a romantic second honeymoon to recapture what we'd lost somewhere along the way. Now I realized it was probably her exit strategy. Get me out of the country, maybe arrange for some kind of accident, or just abandon me in Rome and file for divorce while I was trying to figure out how to get home. We'll see, I said. I'm keeping my options open. The party continued around us, a carefully choreographed dance of corporate politeness. People ate the terrible food and made small talk about the weather and pretended to care about my retirement plans. Diana worked the room like a politician's wife, charming everyone with her wit and grace while Victor lingered nearby, playing the role of the respectful colleague who definitely wasn't sleeping with the guest of honor's wife. At exactly 1 o'clock, Harold Morrison tapped his coffee cup with a plastic spoon and called for attention. The crowd gathered around the main table where someone had set up a small microphone and a podium decorated with balloons that spelled out retirement in silver letters. Ladies and gentlemen, Harold began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd given 1,000 corporate speeches. We're here today to honor a man who has been the backbone of Morrison & Associates for nearly 4 decades. Arthur Denton has seen this company through good times and bad, and his dedication and expertise have been invaluable to our success. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I nodded and smiled, playing my part in this elaborate theater production. Arthur, Harold continued, would you like to say a few words? This was it, the moment Diana had been waiting for. I could see her positioning herself near the podium, her purse clutched in her hands like a weapon. Victor had moved closer too, his phone already out, probably ready to record the humiliation for posterity. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the assembled crowd, colleagues who'd forgotten my name the moment I cleaned out my desk, children who saw me as nothing more than a retirement account with legs, and a wife who thought she was about to destroy my life in front of everyone I'd ever worked with. Thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice steady and clear. 37 years is a long time to spend anywhere, and I've been fortunate to work with some truly remarkable people during my time at Morrison & Associates. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Diana was practically vibrating with anticipation, her hand already reaching into her purse for what I knew were divorce papers. I've learned a lot over the years, I continued, about business, about life, about the importance of loyalty and trust. I've also learned that sometimes the people you think you know best are complete strangers, and sometimes the biggest surprises come from the people closest to you. Diana's smile faltered slightly. Good. But most importantly, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, I've learned that timing is everything in business and in life, and sometimes the best move is the one nobody sees coming. I pulled out my retirement speech and set it on the podium, then looked directly at Diana. Her face had gone pale, and I could see confusion replacing the anticipation in her eyes. Diana, sweetheart, would you join me up here? The crowd murmured appreciatively as she made her way to the podium, her movements uncertain now. When she reached me, I put my arm around her waist and pulled her close, speaking directly into the microphone. My beautiful wife has been planning a surprise for me today, I announced. Haven't you, darling? She stared at me like a deer caught in headlights, her mouth opening and closing without making a sound. Go ahead, I encouraged her. Don't be shy. Show everyone what you brought for me. With trembling hands, she reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope. The divorce papers. I could see Victor near the back of the crowd, his face a mask of confusion and growing concern. What is it, honey? I asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Don't keep us in suspense. Arthur, She started, but her voice cracked. I took the envelope from her hands and opened it, making a show of reading the contents. The crowd had gone completely silent, sensing that something was very wrong with this picture. Well, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. It seems my loving wife of 28 years has decided that my retirement would be the perfect time to serve me with divorce papers. In front of all of you. At my own party. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Diana looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. But that's not the best part, I continued, warming to my theme. The best part is that she's been having an affair with Victor Hale. You remember Victor, the ambitious young consultant who's been working so hard to make partner? He's right over there. Every head in the room turned to look at Victor, who had gone sheet white. Some people started whispering, others pulled out their phones to record what was rapidly becoming the most entertaining retirement party in Morrison & Associates history. Arthur, please, Diana whispered, but I was just getting started. You know what the really funny thing is? I asked the crowd, my voice taking on the conversational tone I used to use in board meetings when I was about to deliver bad news to the executives. Diana thought she was so clever, planning this whole thing. She probably figured she'd humiliate me, take half of everything I'd worked for, and ride off into the sunset with her boy toy. I looked directly at Victor, who was slowly backing toward the exit. "But here's what she didn't know," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear me. "I've been a CFO for 15 years. I understand money better than she understands anything. And 3 months ago, when I first started suspecting something was wrong, I moved every single asset I legally could into an irrevocable offshore trust." The silence in the room was deafening. "The house? It's in the trust. The retirement accounts? Trust. The investment portfolio? Trust. Even the cars are leased through a shell company that's owned by the trust. Diana, sweetheart, you just divorced yourself out of everything except whatever's in your personal checking account." Diana's face had gone from pale to green. She looked like she was going to be sick. "And the best part," I said, grinning at the crowd like I just told the world's funniest joke, "is that it's all completely legal. I didn't hide anything, didn't commit fraud, didn't break a single law. I just planned ahead, like any good CFO would." I stepped back from the microphone and looked at Diana, who was staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Congratulations, honey," I said quietly, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "You played yourself." The crowd erupted. Some people were laughing, others were taking pictures, and a few were already heading for the exits to spread the gossip to anyone who hadn't been lucky enough to witness the carnage firsthand. Diana grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through my suit jacket. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I'll sue you. I'll take you for everything." I looked down at her with the same expression I used to reserve for junior accountants who'd made basic arithmetic errors. "With what money, darling? You just quit your job last month, remember? Something about wanting to focus on your consulting business that doesn't actually exist. And I'm pretty sure Victor's not going to be in a position to help you much longer." I glanced over at Victor, who was being cornered by Harold Morrison and 2 other senior partners. Their faces suggested that his career at Morrison and Associates was about to come to an abrupt end. "But don't worry," I continued, patting Diana's hand like she was a confused child. "I'm not completely heartless. I'll make sure you get whatever the court says you're legally entitled to from the divorce. Should be enough to rent a nice studio apartment somewhere." I stepped away from her and addressed the crowd one final time. "Thank you all for coming today," I said into the microphone. "This has been even more memorable than I hoped it would be. I'll see you around." And with that, I walked out of the Morrison and Associates corporate event hall, leaving behind 37 years of corporate servitude and a wife who thought she was smarter than a man who'd spent his entire career making sure other people's money ended up exactly where it was supposed to be. The real fun was just getting started. Kyle found me 3 hours later at the Brass Monkey, nursing my 3rd whiskey and staring at the muted television above the bar. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a cop bar. Dim lighting, scarred wooden tables, and the kind of atmosphere that discouraged small talk and encouraged serious drinking. "Jesus Christ, Arthur," he said, sliding onto the bar stool next to me. "I've been getting phone calls all afternoon. Half the city knows what happened at your party by now." I took another sip of whiskey, savoring the burn. "Good. Let them talk." "You want to tell me what the hell that was really about?" I turned to look at my oldest friend, the only person in my life who'd never wanted anything from me except honesty. Kyle's weathered face showed concern, but also something that might have been admiration. "You heard Diana on the phone last night, didn't you?" he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. 11:47 p.m. She was talking to Victor, planning my public humiliation. They thought they had it all figured out. Kyle signaled the bartender for a beer, then turned back to me. "So you decided to beat them to the punch." I decided to remind them that there's a difference between being old and being stupid. "The offshore trust thing? That's real?" "Every word. Set it up 3 months ago when I first started noticing the signs. Late nights, new clothes, separate bedrooms. I might be old, but I'm not blind." I finished my whiskey and gestured for another. "Took me 37 years to accumulate that wealth, Kyle. I wasn't about to let some gold-digging wife and her boy toy steal it from me." "What about the kids?" That was the question I'd been dreading. Olivia and Ben had looked at me like I'd grown a second head when I'd dropped my bombshell. They'd probably been counting on their inheritance to solve their various financial problems. "They made their choice when they applauded Diana handing me those divorce papers," I said. "Did you see their faces? They knew what was coming. She probably promised them a cut of whatever she thought she was going to get from me." Kyle was quiet for a moment, processing everything I'd told him. Finally, he spoke. "You know this is going to get ugly, right? Diana's not going to just roll over and accept this. And Victor, that kid's got connections in the business community. They're going to come after you." I smiled, feeling the whiskey warm in my stomach. "Let them try. I've got something they don't have." What's that? 40 years of experience dealing with people who think they're smarter than me. We drank in comfortable silence for a while, watching the local news on the television. Nothing about my retirement party yet, but it was only a matter of time. In a city this size, a public meltdown at a corporate event was prime gossip material. My phone had been buzzing all afternoon, calls from Diana, from the kids, from various colleagues who'd witnessed the carnage. I'd turned it off an hour ago, tired of listening to voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading to confused. So what's the plan? Kyle asked eventually. Plan? Come on, Arthur, I know you better than that. You didn't just humiliate your wife and her boyfriend in front of half the business community without thinking about what comes next. You're a strategist. You always have been. He was right, of course. Even in college, I'd been the one who planned our weekend trips, figured out our class schedules, made sure we had backup plans for our backup plans. Old habits are strong. First, I need to make sure the trust is bulletproof, I said. I've got a meeting with my lawyer tomorrow morning to go over everything one more time. Diana's going to hire the best divorce attorney she can afford, which won't be much, and they're going to look for any way to break the trust. And second, I grinned at him, feeling more alive than I had in years. Second, I'm going to make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of people Diana and Victor really are. They wanted to play games? Fine, but they picked the wrong opponent. Kyle raised his beer in a mock toast. To Arthur Denton, the meanest snake to ever balance a budget. I'll drink to that. We were interrupted by the sound of the bar's front door slamming open hard enough to rattle the windows. I turned on my bar stool to see Victor Hale striding toward us, his perfect hair disheveled and his designer suit wrinkled. His face was flushed with anger and what looked like panic. "You bastard," he snarled, stopping just close enough for me to smell the desperation on him. "You destroyed everything." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, studying him like a bug under a microscope. Did I? How so? Morrison fired me. They said I violated the company's ethics policy by having a relationship with a client's spouse. My reputation is ruined. No one in this city is going to hire me now. That's terrible, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. Have you considered a career change? I hear McDonald's is always hiring. Victor's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me, which would have been entertaining. Kyle must have sensed it too, because he shifted slightly on his bar stool, positioning himself to intervene if necessary. You think you're so smart, Victor said, his voice shaking with rage, but you have no idea what you've done. Diana loves me. We were going to build a life together. With my money, I pointed out. Don't forget that part. It wasn't about the money, I laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the bar's ambient noise. Kid, it's always about the money. You think a 58-year-old woman falls for a 28-year-old consultant because of his sparkling personality? She wanted security, and you wanted a sugar mama. The only difference is that she thought she was trading up, and you thought you were getting a free ride. Victor's face went through several interesting color changes. You're wrong. We have something real. Had, I corrected. Past tense. Because unless Diana's been hiding a secret fortune somewhere, she's about as financially attractive as a root canal now. How long do you think your great love story is going to last when she can't afford to take you to fancy restaurants anymore? Before Victor could respond, my phone started ringing. I'd forgotten I'd turned it back on. The caller ID showed Diana's number. Excuse me, I said to Victor, then answered the call. Hello, darling. How was the rest of the party? Arthur, we need to talk. Diana's voice was tight with controlled anger. This is insane. You can't just steal everything we built together. I didn't steal anything. I protected my assets from a wife who was planning to divorce me and take half of everything I'd worked for. There's a difference. The house is in both our names. Actually, it's not. I transferred my half to the trust 6 weeks ago. You signed the papers yourself. They were mixed in with some other documents I told you were insurance updates. You really should read things before you sign them, sweetheart. Silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to remember what she'd signed. That's fraud, she said finally. No, that's planning. Fraud would be if I'd lied about what the papers were. But I never said they were insurance documents. You just assumed that's what they were when I mentioned insurance updates. Reading comprehension was never your strong suit. Victor was staring at me with a mixture of horror and fascination, like someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Arthur, please, Diana said, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she sounded genuinely desperate. We can work this out. We don't have to go through with the divorce. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. A mistake? I repeated. Diana, you've been sleeping with Victor for at least 6 months. You planned to humiliate me at my own retirement party. You turned our children against me and made them complicit in your little scheme. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior. The kids don't know anything about Victor. Really? Then why did they look so pleased when you handed me those divorce papers? Why did they applaud? You promised them something, didn't you? Told them they'd be better off when you got your hands on my retirement money? Another long silence. I want half of everything, she said finally, dropping the pretense of reconciliation. I don't care what legal tricks you've pulled. I'm entitled to half of the marital assets. You're entitled to whatever the court says you're entitled to, I replied, which, given that most of our assets were acquired before the marriage or through inheritance from my parents, probably won't be as much as you think. But hey, you're welcome to try. I'm sure there are plenty of lawyers who'd be happy to take your case on contingency. I hung up and looked at Victor, who was still standing there like a statue. Well, I said, did you get all that? Your girlfriend is about to become a very expensive legal problem. Still think it's true love? Victor opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Finally, he managed to speak. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. He sounded like a man who'd just realized he'd bet everything on a horse that was already gone. Yes, it is, I said calmly. You just don't know it yet. He stared at me for another moment, then turned and walked out of the bar without another word. Kyle and I watched him go, then turned back to our drinks. Think he'll cause trouble? Kyle asked. Victor? No, he's a coward. He'll probably be on a plane to another city by the end of the week, trying to rebuild his career somewhere nobody's heard of Morrison and Associates or Arthur Denton. And Diana? I smiled and raised my glass. Diana's going to find out what happens when you try to outsmart someone who's been playing the game longer than you've been alive. The war was just beginning, and I intended to win every battle. The law offices of Steinberg, Martinez, and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of the Meridian building downtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture designed to intimidate. I'd been here exactly once before, 3 months ago, when I'd first started setting up the offshore trust that had saved my financial life. Margaret Steinberg, Maggie to her friends, was exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted in your corner when the world was falling apart. 55 years old, silver-haired, sharp as a razor, and ruthless enough to make a corporate raider nervous. She'd built her reputation destroying men in divorce court, which made it ironic that she was now helping me avoid that exact fate. Arthur, she said, rising from behind her mahogany desk as her secretary showed me into her office. I have to say, when I heard about yesterday's festivities, I was impressed. Most of my clients would have just taken the humiliation and paid through the nose for the privilege. Most of your clients aren't CFOs, I replied, settling into one of her leather chairs. We don't like surprises, especially expensive ones. Maggie laughed and poured coffee from an elaborate machine that probably cost more than most people's cars. No, I suppose you don't. I've been reviewing the trust documents since you called yesterday evening. Everything looks solid, but Diana's attorney is going to challenge it. They have to. It's the only play they have left. Who'd she hire? Robert Chen from Chen and Associates. He's good, but he's not a miracle worker. The trust was established well before any divorce proceedings were initiated. All the transfers were properly documented, and you followed every legal requirement to the letter. Unless they can prove fraud or coercion, they don't have a case. I sipped my coffee, savoring both the taste and the knowledge that Diana was about to learn an expensive lesson about underestimating people. What about the house? That's where things get interesting, Maggie said, opening a thick file folder. Technically, Diana still owns 50% of the property, but since the mortgage was paid off using funds from the trust, she's essentially a minority partner in a property she can't afford to maintain. She'll have to sell, and when she does, the trust gets first right of refusal to buy her share at fair market value. Which means you can lowball her, and she'll have to take it, because she won't have the resources to find another buyer willing to deal with the legal complications. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Diana would be forced to sell her half of our house to me for whatever I was willing to pay, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. There is one potential problem, Maggie continued. The kids. I'd been expecting this. Olivia and Ben had both called me multiple times since yesterday, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails about their inheritance, their financial situations, their various needs and obligations. I'd ignored every single call. What about them? They could claim that you transferred assets to the trust specifically to deprive them of their inheritance. It's a long shot, but if they can prove you acted with intent to defraud your heirs, they can't, I said firmly, because that's not why I set up the trust. I set it up because I suspected my wife was cheating on me and planning to divorce me. The kids were never supposed to inherit anything while I was alive anyway. That's what life insurance is for. Maggie nodded approvingly. Good. That's exactly what you'll say if anyone asks. The trust was established for asset protection purposes, not to defraud anyone. Your motivation was protecting your retirement security, not screwing over your children. We spent another hour going over the details, making sure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. By the time I left Maggie's office, I was confident that Diana's legal challenges would fail spectacularly and expensively. I was walking to my car when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ben's number. "Hello, son." "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Ben's voice was tight with panic. "Mom called me this morning crying. She says you've stolen everything and she's going to lose the house." "I haven't stolen anything. I protected my assets from a wife who was planning to divorce me and take half of everything I'd worked for. There's a difference." "But what about us? What about our inheritance?" There it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for his mother, not worry about his parents' marriage, just naked greed disguised as family loyalty. "What about it?" I asked. "You're 29 years old, Ben. You shouldn't be counting on an inheritance to solve your financial problems." "That's easy for you to say. You don't know what it's like out here. The student loans, the credit cards, the mortgage on the condo. I'm drowning, Dad. We all are." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you applauded when your mother handed me divorce papers at my retirement party." Silence on the other end of the line. "You knew what she was planning," I continued. "Both of you did. She probably promised you a cut of whatever she thought she was going to get from the divorce settlement." "How much, Ben? What was your price for betraying your father?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like? Explain to me how my own children ended up applauding my public humiliation." Ben was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller, more honest than it had been since the conversation started. "She said you'd been planning to cut us out of your will anyway. She said you told her we were disappointments and you were tired of supporting us. She said the divorce would be better for everyone." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Diana hadn't just planned to steal my money. She'd poisoned my children against me to make sure they'd support her scheme. "And you believed her?" She had reasons, Dad. Good reasons. You haven't exactly been father of the year lately." "I've been working 60-hour weeks for 37 years to build the wealth you and your sister were so eager to inherit. If that makes me a bad father, then I guess I'm guilty as charged." "Dad, please. We can fix this. We're family." "Family," I repeated. "Right. Well, here's some free advice about family, son. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. You and Olivia showed me exactly who you are yesterday. I won't make the mistake of forgetting." I hung up before he could respond. The drive home took me through the heart of downtown, past the Morrison and Associates building where I'd spent the better part of my adult life. The parking garage where I used to park every morning was visible from the street, and I found myself wondering if Victor was cleaning out his desk right about now, or if security had already escorted him from the building. My house now, not Diana's, sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in one of the city's better neighborhoods. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds Diana had spent so much time and money on were in full bloom, and the automatic sprinkler system was creating rainbow arcs in the afternoon sunlight. It looked like the American dream made manifest. Too bad the dream had turned into a nightmare. Diana's car was in the driveway, which meant she was inside, probably going through financial documents and trying to figure out exactly how screwed she was. I parked my car in the garage and entered through the kitchen door, just like I had every day for the past 28 years. She was sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her like a war room planning session. Bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, everything she could find that might give her some leverage in the divorce proceedings. "Hello, Diana." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and a face that had aged 10 years overnight. The perfectly put-together woman who'd served me divorce papers yesterday was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate and defeated. "Arthur, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "This is crazy. We've been married for 28 years. We built this life together. You can't just take everything and leave me with nothing." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, studying the papers she'd scattered across the table. "I'm not taking everything, Diana. I'm keeping what's mine. There's a difference. What's yours? What about what's ours? The house, the investments, the retirement accounts. We built all of that together." "Did we? Because I seem to remember working 60-hour weeks while you played tennis and had lunch with your friends. I remember balancing budgets and managing portfolios while you spent money on clothes and jewelry and spa treatments. Exactly what part of building our wealth did you contribute to?" Her face flushed with anger. "I supported your career. I raised our children. I maintained our home and our social connections. That's worth something." It was worth something, I agreed. It was worth 28 years of marriage, a comfortable lifestyle, and social status in this community. But you threw all of that away when you decided to start sleeping with Victor Hale? That was a mistake. No, Diana. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the grocery store. A mistake is bouncing a check because you forgot to transfer money between accounts. Having a 6-month affair with a man young enough to be your son and then planning to humiliate me at my own retirement party. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A series of choices. She stared at me for a moment, then her expression shifted from desperate to calculating. I'd seen that look before, usually when she was trying to manipulate me into buying something expensive or agreeing to some social obligation I didn't want. What if I told you I was willing to work things out? What if we called off the divorce and tried to rebuild our marriage? I almost laughed. You mean, what if you realized that divorcing me was going to leave you broke and alone, so now you want to pretend the last 6 months never happened? I made mistakes, Arthur. I admit that. But people can change. We can go to counseling, work through our problems, maybe take that cruise we talked about. The cruise where you were planning to abandon me in Rome? Her face went white. How did you? Diana, I've been a financial investigator for 40 years. You think I don't know how to follow a money trail? You've been researching one-way tickets to Europe for months. You opened a bank account in Switzerland 3 weeks ago. You've been planning this divorce for at least 6 months, probably longer. She slumped in her chair, the last of her fight draining away. So what happens now? And now you get to experience the consequences of your choices. You'll get whatever the court says you're entitled to in the divorce settlement, which won't be much. You'll have to sell your half of the house to the trust at fair market value, which I'll determine. And you'll have to figure out how to support yourself without access to my income or assets. And the kids? What about them? They're your children, Arthur. Whatever you think of me, don't punish them for my mistakes. I looked at her with something that might have been pity if I'd had any left to spare. The kids made their own choices, Diana. They chose to believe your lies about me. They chose to applaud when you handed me those divorce papers. They chose to see me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. I didn't punish them. I just stopped rewarding them. Diana was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full reality of her situation finally sank in. Please, Arthur, I'm begging you, don't do this. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy our marriage for a chance at a younger man and what you thought was going to be easy money. I stood up and looked down at her, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. You have until the end of the week to move out of the house. After that, I'll have the locks changed and your belongings will be on the front lawn. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, Diana. Maybe Victor will take you in. Or maybe you can call one of those friends you spent so much time having lunch with. I'm sure they'll be happy to help. I walked out of the kitchen and left her crying at the table, surrounded by the financial documents that proved just how completely she'd miscalculated. The war was over. I'd won every battle that mattered, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the Brass Monkey with Kyle, watching the local news and enjoying the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from a job well done. The divorce proceedings were moving along exactly as Maggie had predicted. Diana's lawyer had filed every motion he could think of, and every single one had been dismissed. The trust was bulletproof, the asset transfers were completely legal, and Diana was learning the hard way that hiring a lawyer on contingency doesn't work when there's no money to win. So, what's the latest? Kyle asked, sliding a fresh whiskey across the bar. Diana moved out of the house yesterday, I said, savoring both the drink and the news. She's renting a studio apartment above the dry cleaner on 5th Street. Victor lasted exactly 1 week before he decided their love wasn't strong enough to survive her financial problems. Kyle laughed. Where'd he go? Phoenix, according to my sources. Got a job with some consulting firm that probably doesn't know about his ethical issues yet. Give it 6 months, and he'll be someone else's problem. And the kids? That was the one part of this whole situation that still bothered me, though not for the reasons most people would expect. Olivia and Ben had both tried to reconcile with me once they realized their inheritance wasn't coming, but their attempts at reconciliation were so transparently motivated by self-interest that they were almost insulting. Olivia's been calling twice a week, trying to convince me that she was manipulated by Diana and never really supported the divorce. Ben's been sending me articles about the importance of family and forgiveness. Neither of them seems to understand that I heard them applauding when Diana handed me those papers. You think you'll ever forgive them? I considered the question while I watched the news anchor discuss a downtown development project that would probably fail within 2 years. Maybe, but not because they want their inheritance back. If they ever figure out how to be decent human beings without expecting a financial reward for it, we might have something to talk about. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. What's that about? Kyle asked. Diana's lawyer wants to schedule a settlement conference. Apparently they're ready to accept whatever I'm willing to offer. How generous are you feeling? About as generous as she was when she was planning to take half of everything I'd worked for. We were interrupted by the sound of the bar's front door opening. I turned to see a woman I didn't recognize walking toward us, mid-40s, professionally dressed, with the kind of confident stride that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. "Arthur Denton?" she asked. "Depends who's asking." She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "Jennifer Walsh, Channel 7 News. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about your retirement party." Kyle and I exchanged glances. The story had been making the rounds in local business circles, but so far it hadn't attracted media attention. That was apparently about to change. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Well, there are rumors that you publicly humiliated your wife at your retirement party, and that you've used some kind of legal loophole to avoid paying her a fair divorce settlement. Some people are saying you're a vindictive old man who's abusing the legal system to punish your ex-wife for leaving you." I looked at Jennifer Walsh and saw the same kind of predatory gleam in her eyes that I'd seen in Victor's face 3 weeks ago. She thought she'd found an easy story. Rich old man screws over innocent wife, film at 11. "Some people," I repeated. "Let me guess. Diana's been telling her side of the story." Jennifer's smile confirmed my suspicion. "Mrs. Denton did reach out to us, yes. She's concerned that other women might find themselves in similar situations if your tactics become more widely known." "My tactics?" I said slowly. "You mean protecting my assets from a wife who was planning to divorce me and take half of everything I'd worked for? She says you tricked her into signing documents she didn't understand, and that you moved money offshore specifically to avoid paying her a fair settlement." I finished my whiskey and set the glass down carefully on the bar. "Ms. Walsh, let me ask you something. If you found out your husband was cheating on you and planning to divorce you at your own retirement party, what would you do?" "That's not really the point." "It's exactly the point. Diana wasn't some innocent victim who got blindsided by a vindictive husband. She was a cheating wife who thought she could humiliate me publicly and then take half of my retirement savings. The only difference between us is that I was better at planning than she was." Jennifer pulled out her phone and started recording. "So you admit that you deliberately moved assets to avoid paying your wife a fair settlement?" "I admit that I protected my legally owned assets from a wife who was planning to steal them. Everything I did was completely legal and properly documented. If Diana had been honest about wanting a divorce instead of trying to humiliate me publicly, she might have gotten a more generous settlement." "But don't you think you have a moral obligation to support the woman you were married to for 28 years? I looked at Jennifer Walsh and realized she was exactly the kind of person who would have applauded Diana's plan if it had worked. The kind of person who thought marriage was a business transaction where the woman was entitled to half of everything regardless of what she contributed or how she behaved. "Ms. Walsh, let me tell you what moral obligation looks like," I said, my voice taking on the same tone I'd used in board meetings when I was about to deliver bad news. "Moral obligation is working 60-hour weeks for 37 years to build wealth for your family. Moral obligation is staying faithful to your marriage vows even when your wife stops caring about yours. Moral obligation is not planning to humiliate your spouse at their retirement party because you're too much of a coward to ask for a divorce honestly." Jennifer's expression shifted slightly. She was starting to realize this wasn't the simple story of an abusive old man that Diana had probably sold her. "What about your children?" she asked. "They say you've cut them off financially because they supported their mother." "My children are adults. They don't need my financial support to survive. They just want it to maintain lifestyles they can't afford on their own. When Diana handed me those divorce papers at my retirement party, they applauded. They made their choice about which side they were on." "So you're punishing them for supporting their mother during a difficult time?" "I'm treating them like the adults they claim to be. If they want to support their mother's decision to destroy our family, that's their right. But they don't get to do that and still expect me to pay for their mistakes." Jennifer was quiet for a moment, probably trying to figure out how to salvage her story. Finally, she tried a different approach. "Don't you think there's something unseemly about a man your age being so vindictive toward his ex-wife?" I smiled at her, the same smile I'd used on junior executives who thought they could intimidate me with aggressive questioning. "Miss Walsh, there's nothing vindictive about refusing to reward someone for betraying you. Diana made a series of choices. To have an affair, to lie to our children about me, to plan a public humiliation at my retirement party, and to try to take half of everything I'd worked for. I simply made sure that her choices had consequences. But she's living in a studio apartment now, working as a waitress. And whose fault is that? She could have asked for a divorce, honestly, and probably gotten a reasonable settlement. She could have kept working instead of quitting her job to focus on her non-existent consulting business. She could have treated me with basic human dignity instead of trying to humiliate me in front of everyone I'd ever worked with. Every single problem Diana has right now is the direct result of her own decisions. Jennifer turned off her phone and put it away. I don't think this is the story our viewers are expecting. Then maybe you should think about why your viewers were expecting a different story, I suggested. Maybe Diana isn't quite the innocent victim she pretended to be when she called your station. After Jennifer left, Kyle poured me another whiskey and shook his head admiringly. You know she's probably not going to run that story now, right? Good. The last thing I need is to become some kind of folk hero for divorced men. I didn't do this to make a statement. I did it because Diana thought she could outsmart me, and I wanted to prove her wrong. Mission accomplished, I'd say. I raised my glass in a toast. To consequences, Kyle. May everyone get exactly what they deserve. I'll drink to that. As we sat there in the comfortable darkness of the Brass Monkey, I reflected on everything that had happened since that phone call 3 weeks ago. Diana was working as a waitress and living in a studio apartment, learning what life was like when you had to support yourself instead of depending on someone else's money. Victor was in Phoenix, probably lying on his resume and hoping his new employers never Googled his name. My children were discovering that actions have consequences and that family loyalty can't be bought back with tearful phone calls and Hallmark card sentiments. And me, I was exactly where I'd always been, in control of my own destiny, answerable to no one, and richer than I'd ever been in my life. Some people might call that vindictive. I called it justice. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Maggie, letting me know that Diana had agreed to accept my final settlement offer, at $20,000 and her half of the house sold to the trust for 60% of market value. It was more generous than she deserved, but I was feeling magnanimous. After all, I'd already gotten everything I really wanted. I'd gotten my revenge, my dignity, and my money back. And I'd gotten the satisfaction of knowing that Diana Moss, soon to be Diana Moss again, since she'd be dropping my name as part of the divorce settlement, would spend the rest of her life remembering the day she thought she was smart enough to outwit Arthur Denton. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but she'd been especially wrong about that. I finished my whiskey, said goodbye to Kyle, and drove home to my house. My house now, legally and completely, where I planned to spend the evening reading financial reports and enjoying the kind of peace that only comes from knowing that every enemy who'd tried to destroy you had been thoroughly and completely defeated. The war was over. I had won. And unlike Diana, I was smart enough to know when to stop fighting and start enjoying the victory.